So here's a couple images of what it would look like. So the top image is your dual controller SA120. You can see it has 2 power supplies and 2 fan modules, and to the controllers are those blue rectangles in the middle. So to the left and right of each of those controllers, that's where the SSDs would go. The base model, either whether it's a single controller or a dual controller model, has these faceplates over it. So the SSD option is just that. It's an option if you want to do that, where you basically add in a cage and then you can put the SSDs and have it look like the image down at the bottom. Are there any questions thus far as I'm going through this? Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay. And this is so if somebody somebody buys an SA120 and they want to put SSDs in it, so really there's 2 pieces that you end up ordering. You want to make sure you order the SSD cage and interposer kit. It's a single part number, and if you're familiar with our online server configurator, when you go to the SA120 and say, I want to add in 240 gig SSDs, when you get to the configuration page where it lists all the part numbers, it will put this SSD cage part number in that list. So you don't have to remember it, but if you're using our configurator, it does it for you automatically. But you do have to make sure that somebody orders the kit itself. So it comes with 2 cages. So if somebody wants the ability to put SSDs in the SA120, you're going to get 2 cages with this kit. And then, of course, you'd have to buy the SSDs. And from an SSD standpoint, we've got kind of 2 flavors, the Intel S3500 and S3700 SSDs, and they come in a variety of capacities starting from 120 gig up to 800 gig. So a lot of options in terms of SSD capability and capacities. All right, so along those lines, I wanted to talk to some of the performance testing that we have done with the SSD capability and Cascade specifically, because I think it helps tell a story that is pretty powerful when people are looking at, hey, how do I improve performance? So the Cascade Pro option, so this is the option to the 9286 card. What it does, as I said earlier, it gives you the ability to use SSDs to create up to 512 gig of cache. So in the SA120 scenario, you can, you don't have to use 4 SSDs. You could, so let's say, buy 2 240 gig SSDs. You could have 480 gig of cache. The reality is, you'd probably want to RAID that cache. So in an SA120, for example, you could get 4 240s, and you'd have a 480 gig cache pool with a RAID 1 configuration. So you can do all sorts of things like that. What's important to note with the Cascade capability is 512 gig is the limit. So if somebody happened to buy an 800 gig SSD, you're only going to be able to use 512 of that for the Cascade cache. So some of the testing that we've done, and this is kind of what it shows. So the chart on the top right, we looked at both transactions per second and raw performance, so IOPS. So the first, the chart on the top right, so the first bar, this is just testing. So the testing we did was with an RD640. The results would be similar if you were using it in an SA120 as well. Hard drives only, so if you filled it up with 12 SAS hard drives, you'd get that 696 database transactions per second. Once you start to add in Cascade, so if you add in a Cascade volume, 2 SSDs, the performance benefit is tremendous, right? It's a 14x performance improvement, in this case going up to over 10,000 transactions per second. And you can see the I/O performance as well, a dramatic increase in I/O. So this is really the benefit of what SSDs provide you when using it with cache, and what the Cascade feature does for you. So when someone is out there looking at how do I improve the performance of my database, or how do I support more users in an Exchange environment, definitely look at using SSDs to help improve that performance with the Cascade to get that increase in performance. What's interesting to note here is the two columns on the far right. So one of the features that's available, or one of the options that's available with the LSI 9286 controller, is what's called FastPath, and this would be used in an SSD-only array. So if somebody happened to buy a server and put only SSDs in there, you could use FastPath to get incremental benefits in terms of transactions per second and I/O. So what's important to note here is the benefit is not that great when compared to just using hard drives and SSDs with Cascade. So it's really going to be a specialized type of application where you'd want to get to an all SSD environment, because the reality is you're going to spend a lot of money buying, say 12 SSDs versus just using 2 of them for cache and Cascade. So just wanted to point that out. The other piece that's interesting to note here when using Cascade is from a CPU utilization standpoint. So in the baseline configuration where you have just your SAS drives, the CPU is only getting used 3% of the time. That increases to 76% when you have Cascade, because you're able to process more transactions per second. So it's really making the server more useful. You're getting more use out of that server, and potentially what it allows you to do is save on the cost of additional servers, right? If you can get more utilization out of a single server, maybe you don't need that extra server, or you can delay that purchase for another quarter until you really max out on your CPU utilization. So a lot of benefits you can get out of using SSDs, and one of the nice things with the SA120 is even if you're not sure you need it today, what's nice is the SA120, you'll have that capability, or you have the ability to leverage the benefits of SSDs down the road. So it's a good way to kind of protect yourself from a future investment standpoint. I can use the SA120 as part of my initial solution, and if I ever need to get more performance, I can add SSDs down the road. I don't have to completely tear out my existing solution that I put together. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. We've put together, again, a white paper on this one. What's interesting here, we had a third-party provider do some performance testing. Principal Test Technologies published a benchmark report. So they used an RB540 and an SA120 in a Microsoft Exchange environment. So what they found is just using your 12 nearline SAS drives up in the front, it could support up to 3,800 Exchange users. So then they wanted to see, well, what's the impact if I add in a couple SSDs to improve the performance there? It jumps to 5,300 Microsoft Exchange users when you're putting those SSDs in the Cascade volume. So a lot of great report to read through, and kind of solidifies the capability of the SA120 connected to a server, and it shows you the benefit that you can get by using those SSDs. So you were able to increase that user count. So for those environments where they need more users, or they need more ability to process transactions quicker, this was a perfect example of showcasing how you can do that and what kind of results you could get. Again, both of these white papers and report, you can go to Kathy Brown to get it, and she can share the links with you. Okay, so from a competitive standpoint, there's a lot of info on this slide. I'll point out a few things. So from a pricing standpoint, so on that second row there, the single controller model is $29.99. The dual controller is $33.99. So this is, again, if somebody's, where I always lean towards is the dual controller model. Really, if you can afford to spend the $400 up front, it's worth it, because the reality is you'll probably spend more than $400 by starting with the single controller SA120 and then adding a second controller down the road. The other important piece to note with the single controller model is that it's not only single controller, but it's also single PSU. So really that dual controller model is a great starter model, if you will. So the key differentiators between our competitors, it's again using those SSDs, and what's important about the SSDs is you're not going to sacrifice the front high capacity drive bays, right? In some of the competitors, they do support SSDs, but in order to do so, they're taking up one of the slots up in front. So your 48 terabyte capacity might go down to 40 terabytes of capacity because you're using 2 of those slots for SSDs. You don't have that limitation with the SA120. You can still have your full 48 terabytes of storage up front, and then you can put your SSDs in the back. So it's a nice differentiator. I mentioned the rails here. We didn't want to nickel and dime people, so rails are included with the system. Some of the competition, they do charge for rails. And from a power supply standpoint, we do have a more efficient power supply with that gold power supply. So, that's going to help people save money or help customers save money over time from a power efficiency standpoint. So some nice differentiation here when we're looking at the competitive products that are out there. Okay, so one other solution I wanted to talk about, as beyond just the SSD, data acceleration and just raw storage perspective, is you can use the SA120 in a high availability solution. So what we've done here is we've put together a kind of reference architecture. We've done it, we've tested it, so it's a real solution. Basically a redundant server configuration where you're connecting 2 Think servers to one SA120. So what is that going to do for you? Basically giving you 24/7 availability for applications or storage at really a fraction of the cost of a typical HA solution. And it's going to reduce the complexity because it's a direct attached. You're talking about SAS cables. You don't have, typically when you get into HA, people are looking at a SAN type of infrastructure. That's not what this is. This is really a SMB targeted implementation to get to high availability. And I'll talk to a little bit as we go through this.